nearly 10 years since my burnout experience, and I believe that it wasn't necessary for me to burn out, and it's not necessary for you either. In this podcast, my guests and I share our real-life experiences with burnout. We get into the science of stress and share actionable tips on how to prevent burnout and how to recover from it. I'm Hannah Holden, ex-management consultant and burnout survivor. I work with management consultants to help them avoid and overcome burnout. I help them to get intentional about their choices, rebuild their energy, and embed new healthy habits so that they can get back to loving life. Hello and welcome back. Today I am joined by Sam Robinson. Sam is a consultant psychotherapist based in Bristol and London, and he's joining me today because one of his specialities is burnout. Sam works with high-performing individuals who are experiencing burnout to help them understand the processes that led them into burnout and how they can break their cycle of overwhelming stress. So welcome, Sam.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I think it's a topic that a lot of people don't necessarily consider as important until they're at the point of no return. And so I think if we can have these kind of conversations to help people recognize what might be going on for them, it's just an extra tool in their box of things to look for.
Yeah, great. So let's start by you telling us a little bit more about the kind of clients that you work with.
Yeah, so I, as you said in your introduction, I tend to work with people that are experiencing burnout in workplace settings, in the kind of really high stress work environments. So high achieving corporate settings, maybe this might be things such as recruitment, healthcare, legal sector, finance sector. And clients come to see me typically for one of three reasons. One is they're experiencing a loss of love of what they do. They've lost the desire to do what they do, and they've worked really hard to get there. So they've worked really hard to sort of climb this career ladder, and at the end of it, they've lost their purpose and motivation. And that's one reason they come to see me. Another reason is people come see me specifically for anxiety. So they'll say, my anxiety's through the roof, and I'm finding it really hard to get out of the house in the day. And my days off, I just want to stay at home. And they will believe, or in some contexts, they do have social anxiety, and it's shown up. But they will see me because they'll say, I've never used to be like this. It's not something they've experienced forever. So that's an interesting sign that burnout might be present. Mm-hmm. And the third reason is substance abuse and addiction. My original qualification was in addiction therapy. And a lot of people come see me because they'll be using alcohol or substances, maybe cocaine, to cope with stress in their life. And it will be starting to be consequential in the workplace. Maybe they were at a work event or party and it kind of cats out the bag, as it were. And they'll realize that it'll be the first thing they're thinking about when they finish work. They're coping with their stress around it. And so they're the kind of three reasons: finding a loss of motivation and purpose, anxiety being more than they can manage in their day-to-day, or they're actually finding that the substance use or alcohol use is heightened. And that's typically why they come to see me to begin with. And then we start to explore what's going on. And in really kind of high-performing clients, career performing clients, I find that burnout is often part of this story. And so this kind of interested me to go into this area in kind of corporate burnout, as it were, work stress. And I started to see that maybe more than 50 or 60% of my client base, whether they were seeing me for motivational issues, anxiety-based issues, or addiction-based issues, were in burnout in some area of their life. Mm-hmm. And that just fascinated me. So I started to delve into that, and I've kind of started to build my practice more in that area.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So I think what you're saying then is that burnout is underneath those. So those are the symptoms that they're showing up with. Those are the things that they're initially talking about. The first one that you said about I'm falling out of love with my work, I think is synonymous with burnout. The other two are interesting because anxiety, I guess they're saying here's this symptom, and for you what you're saying is that through some work with them, underneath that is a level of burnout that has contributed to the anxiety. And then with the substance abuse, it's a coping mechanism that isn't necessarily serving them. But they're all coming back to burnout. Really interesting.
Exactly. I'd say in about between 2/3 and 3/4 of my client base tends to be coming back to burnout. And so it's really in a very happy way, it's almost taking over my practice a bit. And so I'm having to really kind of dive into the world of burnout treatment, which is actually really interesting. There's so much there, and and things.
So let's understand a bit more about what has contributed to your clients' burnout, where they've ended up. So when we last spoke, we talked a bit about there are external factors and there are internal factors. There's the way that we talk to ourselves, and then there's what's happening around us. So could you talk a little bit more about those things that have contributed to where they are with burnout?
Yeah, definitely. So I think this is where we get into the kind of superficial and the root cause side of things sometimes. So we have the external factors, is what I call them, which play a role in someone's burnout. This might be things such as your work culture, the culture in work. It's typical for you your work day might finish at 5, but nobody really goes home until 7:15, 8 o'clock at night. Looking at not being able to separate work and life. We talk about work-life balance as if it's something that's really easy to do. But when you're in a career that you've worked really hard to get and you're really passionate about it, it becomes more than maybe you expected it to be. And so just having the phone go off on a Saturday morning, that noise, that ping can switch the brain into that kind of working mode. So not having clear defined boundaries externally around what is work and what is life. And that really contributes towards it. External factors such as the way that you relate to people in the workplace. So we have the company culture, which may be a wider systemic thing. The system within the company is that people go above and beyond. That's often the term. We all go above and beyond within my team. Well, to me, that's a red flag. To none of you go home on time, right? And so there's these kind of statements that show up that indicate external factors. And then we move on to the internal factors. So we looked at the sort of things that's going on within the system someone's within their culture at work. But then we looked at what's happening within them as a person. And this will be things such as the way that they relate to other people that they're either aware of or not aware of. This could have come from the way they related to family members when they were growing up, the way they experienced school, or their very early career, things that happened that led to them believe they had to do certain things internally in order to achieve the kind of things they do. We also look at, I know this sounds a bit strange sometimes, but where's their esteem? Where's their self-esteem? If we have someone that's really lost the drive to get out of bed and lost the love of what they do, but they enjoyed it at one stage in their life, then their esteem is questionably low. So we'll look at, okay, how do they manage their esteem? What things have happened in life that have impacted their self-esteem that we can reframe? And how can we reshape the way that they view themselves in their wider life, family, personally, relationships? Work is one part of that. So they can then come to the workplace recharged, armed with what they need in order to tackle the environment that leads to burnout, because they're one part of that burnout story. Okay, that's the thing. A lot of people come to see me and they think it's all them. It's not. They're one part of that burnout story. And so we help them understand what parts of them lead to burnout, and then what we need to work on a step at a time to help them remove the habitual burnout that tends to show up in high achievers. So a lot of clients I see will be in this, I had to take 3 weeks off work because of exhaustion in 2017. And now I'm at a place where I think I'm going to do that again. And actually, I realized that when I was at university, my third year was just a blur. I don't really remember it because I was just working so hard. And we kind of hear this habitual, constant burnout cycle. So we look at what was happening at the very first time it went on that's continued, because that's the stuff that feeds it. And that will be stuff within your external environment and your internal world.
It's interesting. So I've been reading books on burnout. I've been looking at other burnout coaches, and there does seem to be a high proportion of people who are talking about the first time I had burnout, the second time I had burnout. And the other interesting thing is for people who have recovered from burnout, that many of them have a fear of relapse. And I think that that's something that's always been on my mind since the first time, that there, I never want to be back there again. So yeah, it's interesting that we have these tendencies.
Well, definitely. And I think that a lot of people may or may not realize, but there are actually stages of burnout. There are stages of burnout. So the first stage of burnout, which doesn't feel like it is in burnout at all, we call the honeymoon phase. This is where you love what you do. There's a lot of job satisfaction. You're accepting the responsibility because you're really excited to have it. Maybe you're a graduate from university. You've never had so much responsibility. Yeah. Or maybe you've entered middle management for the first time and suddenly you've got a team of 15 people and it's really exciting. You have sustained energy levels because you're kind of running on adrenaline a little bit. your nervous system's going, this is amazing, this is so good. You're coming home from work and telling your partner about how wonderful your working day is. And you have this unbridled optimism, this belief that you're going to be able to achieve amazing things, right? Because it's a honeymoon phase. Then we move into the second stage, which is the onset of stress. This is where we start to see gentle, maybe physical symptoms showing up. Maybe your heart rate increases when you have to go to a meeting because it's your seventh today, and you've kind of had enough of telling people what they need to do and getting judgment from your peers when you kind of manage them a bit. You're starting to get a bit irritable. You're not focusing like you used to. Sleep quality is such an important thing. When did your sleep get disrupted for the first time around work? Yeah, sleep quality is so important in this. You tend to put work first, or put the thing that is burning you out first. It's not always work. It might be university. It might be family. Yeah, okay. It might be a volunteer charity position you're a trustee of or something. You have lower productivity. We then move into the chronic stress stage. This is where you see persistent tiredness, procrastination, resentfulness. You're starting to not like what you do. You're starting to wish you weren't doing it. You're starting to want something different. Yeah, we're getting more aggressive. We have apathy. We tend to not really care about others or ourselves. Then it's burnout. And it moves into these stages, right? And so I look at, okay, so when were we in these different stages in life, and how long were we in them, and how do we know how to look out for them in the future?
I think it's all, it's all a sliding scale. Good health at one end and, extreme burnout at the other end. And we're all on that scale somewhere, and we're trying to stay, as far to the good side as we can, but we're all there somewhere. That's part
exactly.
of life. So let's talk a little bit about how you then work with people. I know that you've trained in a variety of different therapy modalities. So what does that look like?
Yeah, so I entered into working with burnout coming from the addiction sector, actually. So I trained originally as an addiction therapist, substance misuse and drugs, alcohol, behavioral addictions. And in that, we trained in several modalities that are effective in treating this. So cognitive behavioral therapy is one that everyone knows. And in the UK, it can be a bit of a retort because people go and experience 8 sessions of CBT in the NHS, which can be effective, but really the evidence shows we need 18 to 24. So I can understand why people find that a bit tricky. Okay. Motivational interviewing, it's a way of supporting someone's own intrinsic motivations to change. So those of us that have experienced high stress in our life, we don't want to be that way. We want to change. The motivation's there, yeah. But like I said, the external and internal factors are overwhelming. So when we try and implement that change, we're unable to. Motivational interviewing, or motivational enhancement, works to help someone identify reasons to change, as well as all the reasons they stay the same. There's a benefit to you being in burnout, and a lot of people find that really strange. Right? There's a reason that you are staying like this. There's a reason that it's more comfortable to stay the same than it is to change sometimes, because you've got to look at a whole bunch of stuff that you might not want to address, the way that you live your life, the way that you respond to people. We have this saying in my work where it's when the pain of staying the same becomes worse than the pain of change, that's when we take action. And motivational interviewing is great at helping people bridge that gap. In fact, it's one of my favorite therapies in the world. I work systemically with people. We look at the systems they're within. So this will be their community, their culture, their professional life, their family life, their personal life. And we look at how these kind of map together, a bit like a Venn diagram, where they overlap, and how we address the way that these interact and the way that you respond and behave within them. What rules for living do you have? What is the status quo in your life? And actually, where do we need to disrupt that? I look at how to support people with movement as well. So interestingly, I started offering walk and talk therapy, which has been really supported. People are really interested in it. And the evidence shows that if you offer talking therapies, let's take CBT, for example, in a forestry environment, it decreases depression symptoms by 63%. It decreases someone's experience of anxiety by over 60%. And the outcomes of therapy have shown to be up to 50 to 65% faster in some cases. Okay, so what we do is we kind of go on a walk, and there's some beautiful locations around Regent's Park in London, or somewhere called Lee Woods or Clifton Downs in Bristol. And in that habitual moving forward together, I find that clients tend to respond to the therapeutic process a little bit differently. And, you know, they're often seeing me from corporate settings, not always. And so they're used to going into a place where there's a desk and a chair and a coffee table, and it kind of, my office is, I try and make it as homely as possible, but it's still an office, right? It's still a consulting room. So to take it into the woods, they might come see me from their working place, and we'll meet and go for a walk for an hour. It just switches them into a different environment immediately, which I love. Yeah. And I find that not always, but I find that when working with burnout in outdoor settings, clients can really start to experience significant change within about 6 to 10 weeks. Actually, they can start to experience significant change in their life that can set in about 6 to 10 weeks. It's not the case with everyone. Everyone's different. But I do kind of say that, you know, not only are we doing it outdoors, it might happen a bit faster. It's not anything different to what I do in the consulting room. It's just, I don't know, the power of greenery, maybe.
Interesting. Yeah, we could probably go off on a whole tangent there on why that could be the case, on why movement is so important. I mean, movement is part of historically the stress response, how we would process our stress. So there's perhaps some of that. Really interesting.
Definitely. And I think because stress happens in our nervous system, this is quite widely known right now, right? And we have the 4 Fs. So we have fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, right? We're used to having to fight to defend ourselves when we're under threat. Either we run, flight. Fawn is where we seek comfort because fight and flight's not working. So we might become really people-pleasy with our boss at work. We're constantly giving of ourselves to other people. That depletes us, burns us out. And then freeze is where we go into this catonic freeze state. This is when people might feel really depressed. They might take time off work because they genuinely can't actually function. Yeah, and they've entered a freeze state. A lot of my clients, funnily enough, will have a 5th F, which is a rude word for intercourse, that actually sometimes they'll seek comfort in that way as well. But when these things are kind of showing up in our nervous response, we are programmed in our body to avoid stress, right? We're not programmed to step into it and understand what's happening. Okay, so that's what's really interesting. So movement, the body is connected by the nervous system. It's like a wire system that goes from parts of our brain to every single part of our body, right? And it has a memory. There's therapies now that say actually there's a book written by someone called Bessel van der Kolk. The body keeps the score. So when we go through chronic stress, maybe it could be acute, such as a significant traumatic event, or chronic over time. The body's keeping it. So introducing movement into the work is a pillar of helping these clients feel better. And even though walking, you know, I'm not a somatic therapist, I let people know that, right? But even walking, suggesting that they start to introduce movement into their life where they can. And a lot of them have been to see the doctor, and the doctor says, okay, just improve your diet and go to the gym and you'll feel better. And not to discredit a lot of doctors, there's some wonderful doctors out there, but when you're dealing with chronic stress, sometimes it's difficult because habitually clients don't know how to take care of themselves. So one question I ask is, what was your favorite thing to do as a kid? What was your favorite thing to do? I had a client look at me the other day like I was broken. It was really fun. And I said, when you were a child, before you were 5, what was your absolute favorite thing to do that involved movement? Your favorite thing in the world? And he said he used to put, those of us that may have done this, I definitely did. He used to put a jacket with a hood on his head, and it'd be like a cape, and he'd run around like a superhero. And we did that in the office. We did that in the office. I said, great, let's do it. And he looked at me like I was broken. I said, no, let's do that. And we ran around, and he looked at me a bit weirdly for a minute. and then he sort of did it. He allowed himself to experience that movement in his body. And the joy it brought him was really interesting. And it was a risk. You know, I thought he was going to leave at one point when he saw me get up.
Yeah, when you reach for your superhero cape that you keep in your drawer for occasions just like this.
Exactly. But what it did was show him, look, there was a time in your life when movement was how you found joy. The pinnacles of longevity in life now, we found a diet, sleep, and movement, right? And in burnout, all of these go to the gutter. There's studies that show that really we need 7 to 8 hours sleep regularly to recharge. Yeah. A symptom of burnout that shows is when, you know, somebody just stops looking after themselves. So that could be diet. They're just eating fast food every night or ordering takeaways because it's easier, because they don't have the energy to cook. Sometimes I'll do that. You know, once, twice a month, I'll get home and I have no energy, but it's actually a self-care moment rather than a burnout moment. And so it's so important that we understand that while going to see a psychotherapist such as myself or a psychologist is one part of the story, you need to look at the whole picture. And so I encourage my clients to do more, if possible, than just working with me.
So interesting. I love that image of you guys with your superhero capes.
Yeah, I can be a bit out there.
For me, when it comes to the doctor, you know, the traditional watch your diet and go and exercise, I think that people in burnout can have a habit of pushing themselves too far. And so I know that I was into boxing and I would push myself too far. I'd push myself too far. There was a day where I couldn't even pick up any bags because I'd worked my arms so hard. I think it was about 2 days later I still couldn't pick up anything. And I think that there's a habit of, you know, these are people who have taught themselves to push themselves to the max, to achieve. And they're like, okay, so the thing I need to do to fix this problem is to achieve. I need to go to the gym and I need to work out, and they can push themselves too far. And actually some of the movement that is best for them is something different, is more kind of yoga, more also breath work, which is, you know, it doesn't take any extra energy to practice some of these breath practices, and yet it's in the body, it's rooted and grounded into the body. So yeah, there's just other ways, not just pushing yourself really hard.
And I think it's really fascinating because we have this client base, the ones that I work with, sometimes, not all of them, they've got to a point in their career where you would say they've kind of achieved the ultimate of their success, right? They've got to the point where they've achieved everything they set out to achieve. They might be, you know, at the C-suite level in a financial sector or legal sector or something like that. And so when it comes to introducing self-care to their life, sometimes a lot of the things that they thought have been self-care actions have actually contributed towards their burnout. You described the boxing, right? So a lot of things that they go to the gym every morning for 45 minutes before work every day at 4 a.m. But actually that's impacting on their sleep pattern and it's impacting on their diet pattern. And they might feel good for it, but it's the time that they're using and stuff. So helping them understand that actually we have to approach this differently. Thomas Jefferson said, I believe it was Thomas Jefferson, I apologize if anyone realizes the quote wasn't, that if we want to experience something that we never have, we have to do things we've never done. And so sometimes people will come to me and say, I've got a great self-care plan, but I'm desperately unhappy. And I'll be like, okay, well, your self-care plan's not working, is it? That's evidence of that fact. So we start to introduce things where it's like, look, let's try new things. So I have two actions that are self-care more than anything else. One is surfing and one is freediving, right? I surfed since I was a boy. I grew up in Cornwall in the UK. And I've always surfed. It's something I love. And I got really into freediving about 10 years ago now. And freediving is all about breath, and it's all about stillness and slowing down. You know, you might be down at 30 meters deep and you can't take a breath. So you've got to be really in tune with what's going on with your body. When people are in chronic stress, they're cut off from the head down, right? They're not in tune with what's happening with their bodies. They might be doing something like boxing, but they're so out of tune that they're doing it like you described, to the point where they can't pick up the bags at the end. Freediving is all about how your breath, mind, and body connect, right? And it sounds yogi, and there is a lot of yoga in it sometimes, if you choose. I'm terrible at doing the yoga side of it, I'll admit. I practice once a month, probably. But it's all about, you know, we'll be underwater and we'll get a diaphragm contraction. And all that's telling me is that my CO2 is increasing ever so slightly in my body. My brain is saying, breathe, breathe, breathe. You're not breathing. This isn't natural. But when you train yourself to understand what's happening in your body, you realize that your blood saturation oxygen levels in freediving are 98 to 99%. It's really high, right? When we're breathing here right now. You won't pass out until you hit less than 50. You start getting contractions at about 97.5%. So you know that you've got an and a half of like, it depletes quite quickly, and the longer you dive, the quicker it depletes. But as you train in freediving, and I'm moving into my advanced diver certificate now, you realize and you understand that you can actually build your CO2 tolerance up quite high. And what I do with my clients, because my freediving side, is a lot of breath work with them. And there's been studies in as recently as 2021 that showed that the dive response, so holding your breath holds, and cold water face immersion, so doing something that shocks the nervous system, showed to reduce panic states in panic disorder and general anxiety disorder, right? And so actually realizing that the nervous system's automatic, yeah? We have parts that we can control, like movement, but we cannot control things like the only two parts in the nervous system, like bodily functions, that have to happen that we can control is blinking. We can stop blinking, and we can hold our breath. Okay? Can't stop your heart beating. You can't stop digesting. You can't stop your liver working, right? But you can have power over some automatic parts of your nervous system. And I actually teach clients that, look, if we can start to understand what's going on breath-wise for us, and understand that actually if we get in tune with our body, we realize that actually, you know, I had a client once who what was contributing to their stress was they're a really shallow breather. I noticed this after a while, that they breathed really shallowly and they never took a deep breath. And they went through an experience when they were really small where they had to hold their breath and they thought they were going to drown. And the nervous system had to realize they were constantly in this like shallow breathing state. And so we looked at that, and we looked at the way that they actually responded to that experience and decisions they made, and how that anxiety, that fear of dying was showing up in the workplace, which was leading to their burnout, which is, it sounds out there, and that was, you know, a few months down the line of work. The story is more than what you think is happening. I mean, that's the whole point of psychotherapy, right? So it's about understanding it's more than what you think's happening, and it's more than just a mental thing.
I think we could probably have a whole episode on breath work. But let's go back to, so how could somebody identify that they are heading towards burnout, or what are the early signs that you would suggest people look out for?
Okay, so the early signs that people can look out for is really that second stage, the onset of stress. Okay, do you notice that your anxiety is starting to get a little bit more than normal? Are you noticing are you starting to get more headaches? Are you relying, I know this sounds a bit weird, are you relying on coffee more than you used to deal with being in the workplace, to get out of bed in the morning? Are you starting to neglect things that you used to enjoy? Are you realizing that you're not as productive as you used to be? Maybe you're starting to feel like you're not actually achieving anything, that you're working really hard and you're not getting anywhere. Do you find that you're starting to cancel on social interactions, or that you're finding that when you're there, you don't feel present? You're thinking about work more? This is kind of that starting to notice. And are you becoming more irritable than you used to be? Are you reactive, right? Are you having a few more bickers at home or at work? People are ticking you off it more than they used to. These are things, I know that might sound like, oh, it's just normal day to day, I'm having an off day. But what I say is, okay, let's dive into that for a minute. Is there something you can do to help you feel better? And I have this thing on my clients that often it shows up in irritability is one of the first things, getting more irritable with other people. And I suggest that when the finger's pointing out at somebody else, there's one finger pointing out, you've got three pointing back at you. So for every reason you've got to look at someone else, it's not about blame and fault, but you can't change what they're doing. You just can't, and you will stress yourself to the ground by trying to. So let's look at what you're doing that's contributing towards the fact that you're irritable with them.
Yeah, we all have choices about how we respond to what's happening around us, right? So if somebody is listening to this and they're concerned about themselves and they think that maybe they are heading in that direction, or perhaps they're worried about somebody else that they know, perhaps it's somebody, a loved one or somebody they work with, what advice would you give them?
So that's a really good question. So if somebody's starting to think, do you know what, this is ringing true for me, or I'm worried about my partner or my son, is the challenge is often when people are starting to enter into burnout, they don't realize they are. And there's 101 reasons to keep going in the way they are, right? When someone's doing really, really well in something, they've got 100 reasons to keep going. When someone is starting to do really, really bad and struggle and find it difficult in life, they've got one reason to stop, because it feels, I'm starting to feel worse, starting to feel negative, but just as many reasons to keep going. And I don't know if that makes sense. The idea that they'll always have a reason to keep introducing stress into their life. And so sometimes when we approach people with this, they can be reactive, irritable, a bit judgmental, a bit difficult to communicate with. So I would say that telling someone you're in burnout can sometimes come with a negative response, right? So what I would probably suggest to them is, what are you doing that's helping with how you're feeling at the moment? That's a really good question. So what's happening that's helping with how you're feeling at the moment? Yeah? There's a whole bunch of things people can try long before they ever come to see someone like me. Like, I tend to work with people where they're at the point where they are unable to do anything about it. But there's whole things you can do. You can do things that look after your body, such as movement, pilates, yoga, exercise, right? There's something called, what I suggest to people who believe that they can't deal with the amount of stress that's going on in their life, is something called TRE, the tension release experience. TRE is a wonderful practice that's come about where you do a series of stretches with a practitioner that takes you through it, but you only have to have 3 sessions until you're able to do it on your own, which is great. So it's self-led eventually. That puts the big muscles in your glutes, something called your psoas muscle, under tension, and then causes it to start to shake. Eventually you go through this series of specific stretches and you lie down and you allow your body to shake. We've lost the ability to release stress, right? There's the idea now that we have lost the ability to release stress from our nervous system. There's lots of practices out there, such as somatic experiencing, which is a body-focused psychotherapy, TRE, trauma and tension release experience, where we learn how to release the tension and stress from our body physically, so we're not carrying it. And I've seen clients that have come to see me and I've referred them to TRE. We've only needed to see each other for maybe 5, 6, 7 weeks, and then we move to bi-weekly, because they're starting to introduce something to their daily life that is helping them. Right? So I propose we'll go and look for some bodily experience that's nothing to do with how you think, because a lot of this centers neck up, right? Go get in touch with your body, go do something. If you're
there's a quote from a burnout coach where he says something like, the habits that got you into burnout are not the habits you need to get you back out of it. And I think the habits that get you in are all of these kind of mental overthinking, knowing how to thrive in the workplace and be successful, but the how to get yourself back out of it, it's connecting neck down, as you were just saying.
I think I'm going to rob that. That's a brilliant saying, actually. The habits that got you in aren't the ones that are going to get you out. And we have this saying back from addiction treatment that you can't think yourself well. So this idea that you can't think yourself well, you've got to understand how the thoughts, feelings, emotions, behaviors, physical experiences connect, and relationally what happens, right? You can't think yourself well. If somebody comes to me and they're at the very early stages, right, and they someone might be listening to this, and they're like, do you know what, I'm connecting with a lot of this. I realize that I'm starting to not enjoy what I do. It's not been going on very long, right? There's a plethora of information, resources available, YouTube talks, books you can read, coaches that you can go see for one session, right? Simply doing one thing that introduces some understanding and psychoeducation around this thing could be the thing that intervenes now before you end up in this habitual chronic stress burnout state, right? It's really typical. It only takes a pebble to start a landslide, right? So it can be one tiny thing that you're doing habitually that leads to burnout, but it can also be one tiny thing that you introduce to your life that prevents it, because burnout's not necessary. The title of this podcast, burnout isn't necessary. And actually, sometimes people are absolutely amazed at the small adjustment they can make to their life and the massive impact this has.
You know what? I think that is the perfect note for us to finish on. So thank you, Sam, so much for joining us. If you are listening and you would like to contact Sam, you can connect with him on LinkedIn and you'll find him under Samuel W. Robinson. And likewise, his website is www.samuelwrobinson.com, and I will make sure that those are included in the show notes. So thank you for listening, and thank you, Sam, for joining me today.
These
podcasts are here to help you manage your stress and burnout, and your feedback is really valuable. So please rate this podcast and also drop me a note with any questions, suggestions, or feedback that you might have. One of the most common questions I get asked is, where should I start? And I believe that the best place for you to start is to learn how to soothe your nervous system. I've created a free download with instructions for 5 different ways that you can do just this, and all of them work pretty much instantly. It's called the Essential Toolkit for Management Consultants. You can download it now at www.hannahholden.co.uk/essential. One last thing, it's the legal language. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of your doctor, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional.